Of the many genres that exist in this world, horror and I probably have the strangest relationship. Simply put, I have zero desire to be scared. Even in controlled settings like movies or haunted houses, the idea of being afraid and running for my life has absolutely zero appeal to me on a personal level. Yet I find myself at the same time oddly fascinated by it. Not so much the being scared myself part, but figuring out what other people consider scary. So whenever I see some trailer for the latest slasher or horny teenager's gonna die film, inevitably, come release day, I'm on the movie's Wikipedia page reading about its plot. This has been something I've done for actual years at this point. I've never seen any of the movies I've looked up, with Cabin in the Woods, the OG Blair Witch Project, and The Shining being the only exceptions. And yet, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of horror from just reading about it. And one thing that I find interesting is how different cultures view and have their own ideas on horror and the various tropes and iconography used within it. For example, here in the West, horror is usually action-orientated, with cleanly and clearly defined morals, and often portrays the horror elements as something that can be overcome or defeated, and usually with some kind of a satanic tinge to it. On the other hand, in Japan, horror is much more psychological, with the morality of the monster and even its victims being ambiguous, and often portrays the monster as an evil force or something that cannot be outright beaten, though it may be able to be slowed down, sealed away, or appeased for a time. GhostWire Tokyo is most certainly not the first Japanese-inspired horror game, but it was one of the games on display in Bethesda's E3 2019 press conference, of which I was watching eagerly. I remember seeing the trailer for it and thinking the game seemed interesting. In a lot of horror games, I feel like the mechanics of the genre dictate that you, the player, be weak or else helpless against the monsters. But the protagonist in GhostWire Tokyo wasn't weak or helpless. Far from it, in fact, as the character is able to wield elemental attacks that sort of riff off your standard weapon loadout in most action games. This combined with the promise of a haunted open world, monsters and ghosts inspired by classic and urban Japanese mythology, and all of it being overseen by the legendary Shinji Mikami, well, it got me pretty interested in this game, enough so that I pre-ordered it and even took a half day off work so I could play it when it was released. What I found when I loaded the game up was somehow a game that was at the same time exactly what I had been promised, and also less than what I had been promised. It's also a game that I don't see a lot of people talking about anymore, so I figured I'd go ahead and change that. So let's talk about GhostWire Tokyo, its promises and concepts, what it does right and what it got wrong. Please keep in mind that I am by no means an expert on any of the subjects covered in this video, and if you have opinions that differ from mine, that is okay. Also, before we begin, I want to go ahead and say ahead of time that I am not 100% sure on some of the pronunciations in this video, so if I fumble a name or location, I do apologize. GhostWire Tokyo starts off with confusion and chaos. We're shown a young man getting a call from someone, presumably a doctor, saying his sister doesn't have a lot of time and that he needs to get there fast. Then suddenly we're on a motorcycle with a man riding through the rain-filled streets of the city. As the man makes a turn, a truck doesn't stop and we get the obligatory fade to white as the two of them collide. Suddenly we're in the sky above the city, looking down at everything below. Zooming down into the streets, a disembodied voice tells us we don't have a lot of time, before then trying to possess one of the onlookers to the crash, but finds that it won't work and comments that it can't be one of the living, before turning its attention to the man we were following before, followed by a fade to black. Small tangent here, but one little detail I appreciate is that if you have the subtitles on, the disembodied voice is labeled as a question mark, since we don't actually know who they are yet. We cut back to the man who was in the accident, as from his perspective we slowly sit up and start to look around. As we slowly start to get up, a cell phone grabs our attention, and shows us a dark void covering part of our face. Reacting about as you'd expect, the man starts screaming, even as several other people come up to try and help him. They too recoil in fear and scream, and start to run away as he turns to face them, exposing them to his injury. And it's then that the fog rolls in, never a good thing in horror movies. But unlike normal fog, this fog rolls in like a wave, as if it's drowning everything in its path. We're shown the people who tried to help us before, still running, but as the fog overtakes them, they vanish, leaving behind only their clothes. As the fog rushes towards us, we brace ourselves to be took, only to find that it has no effect on us. The disembodied voice mocks us. "So long as I'm here, you're tougher than that," it says. And then, through the fog, we notice something moving. A parade, made up of ghosts and spirits and monsters, moving almost silently through the abandoned and empty streets. The disembodied voice tells us to hide, and we do so, watching as the strange parade moves to the middle of the intersection before suddenly a man in an Oni mask appears on all the digital displays. The man greets the spirit and tells them that they will help form the foundation of the new world, that he is their salvation and that their time has come. As the masked man speaks, the spirits of those who were taken by the fog appear, before being sealed away in these strange boxes that disappear a moment later. As the man on the screen vanishes, the gathered spirits begin to disperse, and our main character tries to run, only to be stopped by the disembodied voice. The two of them fight, with the man wanting to continue on his way to his sister, while the voice wants control over his body. In the end, the man wins out, for now, and we're given control over the character, for about 6 steps until we trigger another cutscene. Small tangent, but I think giving the player that 6 steps of control was kind of dumb. Like, yeah, I know long cutscenes can really suck, and maybe they did it so that way if you skip the opening cutscene, you're not completely lost as to what's going on. But honestly, 6 steps. That's when we draw the attention of these Slenderman-looking spirits. I guess they're modeled after the idea of the faceless Japanese salaryman, and they're supposed to represent the twisted essence of those office workers who feel unseen and unimportant. I'll talk more on the monsters in this game in a bit, but for now, it's time for our opening combat tutorial. As it turns out, sharing a body with the disembodied voice has some fringe benefits, as we're now able to use elemental-based attacks to fight off these wannabe Slendermen. After defeating the monsters, we dash down the street as fast as we can and find ourselves at the hospital we had been heading for. Stepping inside, we find the hospital deserted, save for a few monsters who seem to have been rounding up souls and ensnaring them in those magical boxes that we had seen earlier. The voice tells us the souls in the boxes are beyond saving now, and that they're probably being taken to the underworld. Fighting our way through a few of the monsters, we hurry towards our sister's room only to experience what I can only describe as a haunting. As we watch, the contents of rooms move on their own. Folded chairs shift to block doorways, and images of a fire fill our vision, all of it somehow related to our sister. When we finally reach our sister's door, we open it, only to step into some kind of ethereal or maybe astral plane. In it, we see our sister as she is, young, unconscious, hooked up to a dozen or so hospital sensors. But standing over her is the man from before, talking about how she's touched the other side but remains alive, for now. Like any good brother, we shout at him to get away from her, to keep his hands off her. And now aware of us, the man ponders, noting that there are 2 of us, and for the first time, we see the face of our spiritual tag-along. Apparently, he and the masked man know each other. No longer interested in us, the masked man turns away and instead back to our sister, triggering the man to try and protect her, only to find himself wrapped up in chains by the masked man's henchmen, who all kind of look like they've been doing meth before now. To be rid of us, the masked man does what is probably the most anime thing he can think of, shoving his hand through our chest and out our back before leaving us to die as he and his goons leave with our sister. And it's here that the man and the disembodied voice have a conversation. The voice is a man named KK. He explains that we're dying, for real this time, and that we have about 1 more breath of life left in us. We introduce ourselves as Aikido and ask him to save our sister. KK agrees and saves us, allowing us to once again wake up on the floor of the hospital room. Looking at ourselves in the mirror, Aikido tries to immediately go back on the deal, saying that he never said he'd give KK complete control over his body, something that amuses KK, but he agrees to play along for now. As Aikido recomposes himself, we're shown what looks to be some kind of surrealist flashback, explaining how his sister, Mari, was in some kind of a house fire, and how Aikido blames himself for not being able to save her. Small tangent here, it's very jarring to me how this game can go from looking pretty good visually to something strange and downright ugly. This whole flashback sequence, for example, looks like something out of a test render, the kind of bare-bones scene you'd make just to get the layout and movements right before going back in and adding in all the details. Seriously, I'm not sure if this kind of visual look has a name to it or anything, or if it's just deliberately trying to look janky, but it really bugs me. Once Akito finishes pulling himself together, the pair leave the hospital, with KK helping to guide Akito through the empty streets toward KK's old apartment and hopefully some answers. Combat in GhostWire Tokyo is a bit of a mixed bag. The player has access to several different magical attacks, the main three of which are inspired by various elements and take the place of a standard action game's weapon loadout. Air attacks are like a pistol, fast in speed and light in damage. Water is your shotgun, with its attacks forming long waves that can hit multiple enemies at once, and might have some kind of a slowing effect on them. Fire is your grenade or RPGs, firing large but slow-moving attacks that explode and deal massive amounts of damage, and are capable of killing lesser enemies outright. The player also has access to a smaller array of more earthly weapons, including a sacred bow that can be used to snipe enemies from great distances, which makes it a really good stealth weapon, along with several types of sacred talismans that can do everything from stealth kill lesser monsters to creating a stunning field of energy that any monster who walks into it will be affected by. The player also has access to a basic melee attack that can be used if the enemies of the game get too close and you need to create a little distance between them. But GhostWire Tokyo's biggest claim to fame was this idea of something called celestial weaving. With the core of this idea, no pun intended, being that if you deal enough damage to the enemies in the game, you'll expose their spiritual core, which you can then pull out of them using your GhostWire, which would allow you to defeat multiple enemies at once. And while this is an interesting idea, the reality of it is less so. In my experience with the game, most combat encounters have anywhere from 3 to 5 enemies per encounter, with more sometimes showing up midway through the fight. And very rarely was I able to get more than 2 enemies at a time to expose their cores to me. Not only that, but while you weave and prepare to pull out an enemy's core, you're left vulnerable to any attack that might be coming at you, making it tricky to do in the middle of a complicated fight, at least until you get the upgrade that lets you perform the weaving a lot faster. Not only that, but aiming in GhostWire Tokyo is stiff. Really stiff. So much so that at one point I got fed up with it and spent a good 15 to 20 minutes fine-tuning the sensitivities so that they would feel better as I played. It got to the point that I ended up actually going online and looking at some of the forums to see what settings other people were using. And eventually I did find a setup that worked for me. Even then, there were times where things didn't feel 100% right, as there were times when I was trying to fine aim that I felt like I was having a seizure with how hard it was to line up my reticle. Also, swapping between your different types of attacks can be a bit tricky to do, as rather than just pressing a button, the game requires you to use the touchpad on your controller, with the direction of your swipe determining the power you select. Personally, I am not a fan of this, as in the heat of the moment I tend to forget which way to swipe to get the power I want. For the record, I was playing this game on PS5, so swapping between your attacks might be easier on PC or on Xbox. I just didn't play those versions, so I wouldn't know. While the game does include the ability to block attacks, my playstyle involves making sure the enemies stay as far away from me as I can help it. So unless I was fighting one of the enemies that launches attacks back at me, I tended not to use the block ability that much. I will say some of the arenas you fight in are pretty memorable, with one of my favorites being in a construction site that has enemies attacking you from multiple levels. Another cool one is fighting groups of enemies in a large shopping mall, and I also really enjoyed this battle inside of a bathhouse that's been affected by the other side. Stealth in this game is pretty basic, and again doesn't reinvent the wheel. You can sneak up behind enemies and insta-kill them, or in the case of larger, more powerful enemies, you can deal a massive blow to them and their health. In all honesty, unless I was using my bow to snipe, I found it just as easy to go in and blast everything in my path, as being caught while in stealth tends to alert all the monsters in the area, regardless of if it was them that caught you. Overall, I would call GhostWire Tokyo's combat serviceable. Nothing is reinvented or elevated, with KK and Akito having no powers or abilities we haven't seen in other games. That being said, it is pretty cool to look at, and there were a few times that I felt like an absolute badass after having taken out a large group of enemies in a flashy manner, or without having taken any damage. Add in some fun set pieces to do battle in, and combat is enjoyable, but can easily become repetitive and grindy after a while. Luckily for us, KK's apartment isn't too far away, though on our way there we pass by a Shinto Tori shrine, which allows us to clear away some of the fog, as well as collect our first Katashiro, which after a quick Google I learn is a human-esque totem made out of paper that is used to invite and house spirits and demons during exorcisms. We, however, have another use for it, and are instead able to use it to gather and collect some of the random spirits floating around before being directed to find a phone booth. Once inside, okay, I gotta stop it right here. Who the hell dials a phone like this? Like, okay, I'll admit, I'm an American, and I know some countries do things differently. But like, what the fuck is this? Is this how other countries dial phones, using a finger for each button? Seriously, no matter how many times I see this animation, it bugs the crap out of me. Anyways, handing over the Katashiro sees us using the tech of one of KK's allies, Ed, to transport the collected souls out of Tokyo, where KK theorizes they can be returned to their bodies given enough time. This leads me to an amusing mental image of a bunch of random people just waking up in a warehouse with no idea of what's going on or how they got there. Stepping into KK's apartment, we find its half living space, half Ghostbusters hideout, complete with a sacred bow that we pick up and can now use to snipe enemies with stealth, as well as some information of what exactly is going on. Turns out KK is, or was, part of a group of people who protected Japan from supernatural threats. A photograph shows KK and his team, with one person's face scribbled out, and it does not take 3 guesses to guess who. Once we're all geared up and ready, we leave KK's apartment, only to find that a barrier has been erected around us and that KK's enemies are trying to crush the entire building with us in it. Heading up the stairs, we find a barrier stone and, smashing it, discover that this slows down the effect of the spell, though KK tells us there are more nearby. Ducking into a nearby apartment, we begin the search for the next barrier stone, only to encounter what I like to call our first altered world event. I'll talk more about these in a later section, but keep in mind that during the marketing for this game, these events were heavily talked about and advertised. With the other side bleeding through and altering the apartment, we scramble and dash through its twisted geometry and floor plan, before spotting the next stone in a closet off in the distance. Being too far to hit ourselves, we use the bow KK gave us and snipe the stone, and upon its destruction, the apartment returns to normal. Heading to the next floor, we again duck into another apartment and find it in an altered state. Like before, we dash through its twisted layout, and this time we also have to quickly slip around this strange tree that seems to be growing inside the apartment, before finding the barrier stone and destroying it. With the last of the stones gone, the barrier drops and we're out of danger. For now. Though KK suspects whoever is working the spell was nearby and watching us. It's then that KK shows us a new power, the ability to ping the area around us and spot any items of interest, as well as monsters or random spirits. And we, in turn, use this ability to follow the trail of the person who tried to kill us before the trail eventually goes cold. From here, KK suggests we try to clear out some of the fog that has overtaken the city and is limiting our ability to search the area. To do this, he tells us to locate more Torii gates, and doing so sees more of the map opening up to us. Additionally, in one of the shrines, we locate a brand new power, the ability to use fire-based attacks, slow but powerful fireballs that deal wide area of effect damage like a grenade or a rocket. It's a welcome power, and I spent a few minutes getting used to it by lobbing fireballs at groups of enemies. Having cleared several Torii gates and cleared up some of the map, Kay tells us we need a better vantage point of the city and suggests that we climb to the top of a nearby multi-story shopping mall. And let me tell you, this level is pretty cool. But first, we need to get there, which starts with us going into a construction site and finding a Torii gate that looks like it was hidden underground and has only recently been unearthed. Going to cleanse it sees us being ambushed by a new kind of monster, a psycho 8-foot-tall woman with a pair of giant scissors and a surgical mask, who, if I'm honest, kind of makes me think of Lady Demetrask. IRL, she's based off the Japanese urban legend of the Kuchi Sakione, or of a woman disfigured by her husband or lover who now appears as a masked woman and asks random people if she is pretty, and then, based off their answers, will kill them or disfigure them to look like her. As an enemy, she's pretty tough. She's got triple the amount of health that the Slendermen do, and she's got several flurry combos with those giant scissors of hers. Luckily, I'm able to dodge and backtrack my way away from her while blasting her with wind and a few fireballs before yanking her core out and sending her back to hell. My prize? Well, after I finish cleansing the Torii Gate, I unlock the ability to fire off water blasts, which function somewhat like a shotgun, with wide but slow-moving waves of damage. Exiting the construction site, I continue on my way to the shopping mall, which towers over us as I get closer to it. From a level design perspective, the shopping mall isn't anything crazy or super inventive. It's basically a series of small arenas connected by elevators, with one or two small indoor sections and several outdoor sections, in the middle of which sits a large Torii Gate and shrine. That being said, I can't help but enjoy this area. Enemies will sometimes spot you from other areas off in the distance, and in the wide open outdoor spaces, they can snipe at you, just as you can snipe at them. The game also starts to throw in these little bedsheet ghost guys at you, who will hover in the air but start lobbing fireballs at you if and when they spot you. Small tangent here, but a few times I was also able to sneak up on Slendermen who were staring at a group of gathered souls, and thanks to a quirk in the controls, I'm able to absorb the souls that they're watching with my Katashiro, before then stealth attacking and killing the Slendermen in question. I find it just kind of funny that I can do it in that sequence. It's like taking away a painting that someone is looking at and then knocking them out. Reaching the midway point, we find ourselves at a shrine complete with a large Torii Gate. Cleansing it sees a large portion of the map cleared and also allows us to enter the shrine and pick up a brand new weapon, a kind of talisman. A quick Google search tells me it's called an Ofuda, that can be used to create area of effect stunning fields against the various monsters of the game. Upon exiting the shrine, we're given a quick tutorial on how to use this new weapon when another scissor lady appears and tries to kill us. After defeating her, the game directs us to climb to the top of the observation deck at the very top of the tower. Making our way up there is more of the same as we battle enemies and collect random souls. As we near the top of the tower, we find a smaller shrine, and it's here that we find our first set of prayer beads, which acts as a kind of external modifier to our powers and abilities. This one grants my wind attacks 20% more damage. Reaching the top of the tower, we use the observation deck's viewfinders to look around the city and soon spot the goon we were looking for. He seems to know we're watching him, however, as he looks directly at us before ducking into a subway entrance and out of sight. When GhostWire Tokyo was first announced, it was heavily advertised as a horror/mystery game. I remember watching the trailers for this game and thinking it looked scary, but also kinda cool. In particular, I liked that the player character wasn't just some defenseless schmuck who could and would die in one hit, as I feel is so often the case with stereotypical horror protagonists. While another major selling point being pushed was that the game was being produced by Shinji Mikami of Resident Evil and The Evil Within fame. And yet, when I play this game, I don't really feel like it's a horror game. The game sets up some interesting mysteries. Where did everyone go? Who is this masked man? What are these monsters that are now wandering around? But it doesn't really let the players stew on those questions, and instead tries to answer them within 15 or so minutes. Everyone was spirited away by this magical fog that separates their souls from their bodies. The masked man is named Hanya, who plans to use the souls he's acquired to remake the world. These monsters are outsiders, violent and angry spirits made manifest now that there is less spiritual influence blocking them. When talking with a friend about this game, he joked that GhostWire Tokyo's way of going about horror was akin to if, in the Saw franchise, Jigsaw left each of his victims a little business card that introduced himself, told them why they were here, and exactly what they have to do to escape, and then just sat back and watched them for 2 hours to see if they'd actually do it. The situation and its circumstances remain horrific, but a lot of the tension is removed by the player having been fed answers to their questions. Even the much advertised hauntings, while interesting and visually impressive, are not scary to me, the player, because I, the player, know it's just the level rearranging itself, and that nothing fundamental has changed about it. While the game does have some moments that are spooky and creepy, I was never really scared during my playthrough of it, save for maybe 1 or 2 moments where a jump scare got me. If I'm honest, I think if the game dialed back the amount of resources at the player's disposal, the horror and tension elements of the game would be a lot better. I, as the player, never really want for anything while I play this game. But if that was tweaked, and if the player now had to be more careful with their abilities, the level of tension would certainly be increased, which in turn would make these monsters seem much more frightening and alarming than they actually are. As it is, when I see a group of Slendermen down an alleyway, I just lob a fireball at them and mop up any survivors. But if there was less ammo for my abilities, and I knew I had to make it 8 blocks with only 2 or 3 ammo refills along the way, well, now I'm going to be a lot more selective about my attacks, and instead I might just decide to run from these enemies rather than fight them. Now, one thing I do want to address is that yes, there are many different kinds of horror, and because of that, there are just as many different kinds of horror games. The suggestions I've made just now definitely lean into a more survival horror style game, which might not be what everyone wants out of a game like GhostWire Tokyo, which is completely fine. I can only speak for myself and what I think would make the game scarier to me, the Console-Fennec. Now yes, if they want to dump in 57 gallons of blood on everything, add in miles of rusty barbed wire and meat hooks, along with tons of body horror, that would be pretty scary too. But then I wouldn't want to play this game, because that's the kind of horror that I don't like. So it's important to keep in mind that horror is subjective and personal to each person who experiences it. In the end, GhostWire Tokyo is advertised as a horror/action title that I personally feel leans more into the action category than the horror category, which is a bummer as this game had the potential to be amazingly scary, or at the very least creepy as all hell. It's just in trying to make the game as appealing to as many people as possible, the horror aspect of it gets a little muddied and lost. Allow me to propose a thought experiment. If you were to find yourself partially possessed by the spirit of a dead ghost hunter, and find yourself at the top of a large building in the middle of a spiritual apocalypse, what is the fastest way down? If you said jump, you're correct. Now the game never expressly tells you this, but if you've been exploring a bit, you might have noticed that thanks to KK, Akito does not suffer from fall damage, no matter how high up he is. So we jump and plummet what is probably 30 or 40 stories straight down, only to find ourselves back at the intersection we started the game in, not so far away from the spot where Akito actually died. And it's here that the game shows you one of its genuinely spooky moments. As the player stands at the site where the game started, the lights in the intersection flicker and die, and ominous music starts to play in the background. Depending on where the player is, they might not even realize what is happening. But if the player looks around, they'll quickly spot the slow-moving Hayaki Yako, or the Demon Parade, a slow-moving procession of evil monsters and spirits into our world. This moment actually got the hairs on my neck to stand up the first time I saw it. Something about the music, the lighting, the slowness of the parade, and just how close I was to it while standing out in the open got to me. I actually found myself ducking for cover and watching as the otherworldly procession moved through the intersection before disappearing into the fog, and only once I was sure it was gone did I head for the subway station that our target had slipped into. Heading down into the subway, we find ourselves in a typical subway station, except with absolutely no one around us. And it's here that I'll admit I got a tiny bit spooked, especially when we go down into the deeper, less traveled areas. Recently, within the last year or so, I, like many people before me, stumbled onto the very excellent YouTube series The Backroom, created by YouTuber Kane Pixels. Through that series, I was introduced to the idea of liminal space horror, which I bring up because this area down here in the subway station kinda drips with liminal space vibes, as we pass by empty shops, cafes, locker rooms, bathrooms, and service corridors as we go further and further down. I have to admit, it did kinda spook me a bit. Soon enough, we hit the actual subway tunnels and end up hopping down and following the tracks for a bit, before ducking into a side passage and witnessing some pretty bizarre and otherworldly imagery. KK says they're rolling out the red carpet for us. We emerge into a large open construction space on the far side of which is a massive torii gate. Approaching it, we're ambushed by the masked goon we've been following, who sucks us into a kind of bubble world and does battle with us as a giant Oni demon. Luckily, air, water, and fire still hurt him, and a few good blasts and shots are all it takes to expose his core and then rip it out. We nail the attacker with a single good shot to the face, knocking his mask off and allowing us to see who our enemy is. This, however, doesn't have the effect you'd expect and sends KK into a rage as the realization hits him. The main masked man stole KK's body and reanimated it to use as one of his minions. Enraged by this knowledge, KK actually leaves Akito's body and attempts to get back to his own, only to be trapped in one of those spirit box things and taken away from us while we pass out. While unconscious, the player is again shown a rather surreal cutscene of Akito being chastised by his sister for missing the anniversary of their parents' death and not going to visit their graves, which is a common thing to do in Japanese culture. Waking back up, we find ourselves alone, and worse still, without any of KK's powers. And just to pile onto the situation, outsiders have begun to fill up the passages behind us, making any attempt to escape 10 times more difficult. Luckily for us, we're not completely helpless. We still have our talismans and our bow, and we can still insta-kill most enemies if we can sneak up on them from behind. Sneaking past the outsiders isn't too hard as the area we're in is very big, and I actually discovered it has a few different ways that the user can escape. In my case, I kept to the left side of the room and snuck past most of the enemies before sneaking back up the spiral stairs we'd passed through on the way prior. This whole section is actually pretty tense and had me nervous, as I was keenly aware that one fuck-up could possibly send me back to the beginning of the sequence. Luckily for me, I didn't get spotted, and I managed to find my way out despite not having KK's little show me my objective power. Climbing out of the subway, I consult the map and then decide to just book it to KK's apartment, which is where the game says I should go next. So I do, not stopping for anything as I run, ducking into one alley to escape some outsiders that end up chasing me, before climbing up a wall and running up the stairs and ducking into the apartment. Once inside KK's apartment, however, we meet someone new, a woman who sure looks like a ghost as she sits at KK's desk. The woman introduces herself as Rinko, and Akito recognizes her from the photo of KK's team that he had seen before. The woman then drops a few hints about our connection to KK still being there even if our souls are separated, before handing us a folded wallet with a photograph in it and telling us it's important, and to give it to KK before she vanishes, which just confirmed for us that indeed she is a ghost. Although low-key makes me wonder if the other minions that we've been seeing around the masked man are maybe the corpses of K's other teammates. Leaving the apartment, we notice that a strange black cloud seems to be guiding us, and we intuit that we're supposed to follow it. So I do, following this black trail and doing my best not to alert any outsiders that we happen to come across. In many ways, I like this stage actually quite a bit. It's interesting to look at groups of enemies now and think, okay, I've got 5 arrows and there's 3 of them, so that means I'd only have 2 arrows left if I come across something else further down the road. Whereas before, I just lob a fireball or a water wave at them. Now though, I'm having to be miserly with my resources, which personally I think does a great job of increasing the tension as I slowly creep through the abandoned city. KK, it turns out, is being held at a shrine, and after killing a few bad guys that are guarding him, I free him from his spirit box and the two of us have a rather passive-aggressive you need me and I need you style conversation before deciding that they're better off with each other and rejoining. We've come a long way in gaming when it comes to building open worlds. No longer just large empty spaces for the player to run around in, the best open world games are able to take their wide open spaces and turn them into an almost character of their own. Something just as memorable as any plot point or any character in the game itself. Building cities in gaming has equally evolved over time, going from just an open space with buildings to including pedestrians, traffic, and even random events and happenings that make the world feel alive. Sadly, when it comes to its open world, GhostWire Tokyo stumbles a bit. On the one hand, the game does recreate the feeling of wandering around a deserted and empty Tokyo city. On the other hand, wandering around an empty Tokyo isn't as fun in-game as you would think it would be. For one, you can't interact with any of the abandoned cars or motorcycles. You can't go into most of the buildings except for convenience stores to buy supplies, and a few buildings that have plot significance or side missions associated with them. And lastly, while you can pet the myriad of suddenly stray dogs and cats that are wandering around, none of them are really amazing conversationalists, even if they are just the cutest doggies and kitties ever. Now, that's not to say that there's nothing to do. There's corrupted trees to clean up, enemies roaming the streets to fight, Neko yokai shopkeepers to buy stuff from, hidden items to find, torii gates to clean, Tengu to jump on, wayward spirits to rescue, collecting gachapon rewards from vending machines, and a small collection of side missions that are sometimes interesting and sometimes not, though we'll talk about them in a separate section. Small tangent here, but one nitpick I can't seem to shake no matter how hard I try is the idea that just everyone is gone. In a culture that is as spiritually aware as Japan, I find this a little odd. Like, don't get me wrong, office workers, delivery workers, people going about their day-to-day lives, okay, them I can see being took just fine with no issues. But like, what about the shrine keepers and the maidens that see to and tend the various shrines and temples around the city? I find it odd that they weren't spared, or at least protected from what happened. For that matter, what about the other exorcists or people like us who are active magic practitioners? Sure, some of them might have been caught off guard and spirited away before they could react, but I find it odd that there's just absolutely no one left. It just feels odd because the city is shown to have an active kind of spiritual infrastructure, and yet none of it did anything to help any of the people who know about it or maintain it. It kind of feels like either the writers didn't think about that or just hand-waved it away because they didn't want to deal with its questions. The different districts of the city are visually distinct though, although they don't leave much of an impression except for maybe the apartment district, which has a lot of visible and tangible corruption about it, giving this area a major apocalypse vibe. Overall, I'd give GhostWire Tokyo's open world a C. It's not the worst I've ever played, as it does have a lot of verticality to it, which can be fun to play around with, but in the end there's just not that much to do besides fighting monsters, doing side missions, and progressing the main plot. In a world that's completely empty with no one around to stop us, it feels like the devs only programmed in the things they'd want us to do, rather than the things we the player might want to actually do. Personally, I'd have loved it if I'd have been able to steal a car and use that for fast travel, or duck into certain clothing stores and steal clothes to change my appearance. Maybe slip into a bank and help myself to all the unguarded cash. You know, all the fun that's only possible if there's no one there to stop us. With KK back in tow, we have our powers back, as well as a new super ability, which is good, because someone narked on us and now every single nearby ghoul wants to kill us. Beating them isn't too hard, but as we finish off the last one, we're caught off guard as the ground begins to shake, and off in the distance we see a by now Disney trademark golden sky beam appear. Unfortunately for us, we can't just go rushing straight to the sky beam, as it's in an area surrounded by fog. Not only that, but one of the torii gates seems to be missing. Actually, small tangent here, but in the beginning, didn't KK make us immune to the fog? Like, we saw it sweeping up on us at the beginning during that opening cutscene, but it didn't affect us then, so why does it affect us now? It seems a little inconsistent. Anyways, as we debate what to do, we hear a phone ringing, and when we pick it up, we find it's the woman from before, who says some things to KK before revealing the location that the fog is coming from, an office building downtown. Making our way there, a whole lot of corruption is infecting this place, and it's also crawling with outsiders. Luckily, we have the cure for what ails them. Reaching the basement of the building, we learn that Rinko used to work here when she was alive, and sure enough, in the lowest levels, we find her spirit messing with some kind of machine the outsiders have rigged up, that is using ether to not only generate the fog, but also hide our missing torii gate. Which... how does that work? Like, up until now, the masked man and his accomplices have always used magic to try and stop us. In fact, up until this exact moment, there's never even been any kind of indication that man-made technology can interact with magic, or even utilize it. Is this how all the fog is being made? How is it hiding the torii gate? These are questions that I desperately want to ask, but the game desperately does not want to answer. But our questions will have to wait as waves of spirits are teleporting in, while Rinko works to shut down the machine. This battle is a bit harder than previous ones because of the confined spaces, and also the spirits have a few different routes that they can take to get to Rinko, meaning if you rush forward, you run the risk of spirits slipping past you along the sides of the room and getting to Rinko and draining her energy. Luckily for us though, not only is she tough, but my attacks don't hurt her, so friendly fire is not an issue. In the end, she manages to shut down the machine and crack the Torii Gate's cloaking field, allowing us to find it and cleanse it when we're ready. Offering her a few words of thanks, we head out and start running around and cleansing the nearby Torii Gates and their associated shrines. As we work, we also unlock several new sets of prayer beads, which thanks to some upgrades, I'll eventually be able to wear 3 of, which offers a nice little boost to some of my powers and basically reduces the number of shots I have to land from my air, fire, and water abilities. With the path no longer blocked by fog, we rush towards the golden sky beam, only to blunder into a trap as a barrier spell springs up around us, trapping us in a few urban blocks which are crawling with some of the most powerful monsters in the game. Luckily for us, we know how to break these spells, and after about 15 minutes of looking around, we find all 4 of the barrier stones and smash them, allowing us to go free. Making our way to the nearby park, we slip into a cave and find ourselves in a large underground ceremonial chamber, with the masked man and his remaining 2 minions. And it's here that KK tells us a bit more about the man and his overall goals. Turns out the man's name is Hanya, and several years ago he lost his wife. That loss has driven him a bit crazy and is what started everything that's happening, with Hanya's overall goal being to open a doorway to the underworld so he can go in and rescue his wife's soul. KK also reveals that somehow Hanya is also responsible for him having his elemental abilities, but that is not addressed or expanded upon in any way. To try and dissuade Hanya from doing anything further, KK brings up his daughter, asking what she must think of all this, to which Hanya has his last 2 minions remove their masks, revealing the corpses of his wife and daughter. Bored with our accusations, Hanya informs us that our sister has moved on to the final stage of his plan, and that we are too late to stop what is to come, but that if we truly wish to continue to struggle against him, his daughter is more than happy to play with us. Which is our cue to have another boss battle. Sort of. See, when she was alive, Hanya's daughter apparently had this habit of finding and adopting stray cats. So naturally, her demonic and monstrous form is that of a cat, with 3 glowing tails as the source of her power. The issue is that she's too powerful for us to fight head-on, though, especially after she rips KK out of our body and forces us to fight without his powers. The gist of this boss fight is to scurry around and hide in these little tunnels, and wait till she passes by, then duck out and GhostWire her tails from behind. Do this 3 times and it lays her spirit to rest, though KK has to suck some kind of talisman out of her body to keep it from reanimating. Discussing what they've learned, KK and Akito are interrupted as the ground begins to shake. Unable to do anything but watch, KK and Akito look on as some kind of massive spiritual giant appears within the cave, before breaking free and starting to make its way towards the center of the city, where it is joined by other large ghostly giants, who gather around a swirling dark vortex as Hanya's ritual enters its final stage. One thing that GhostWire Tokyo took great pride in was the inspiration and interpretation of the various monsters the player would encounter. From umbrella-carrying Slendermen to living dolls made up of newspaper and trash, 7-foot-tall mask-wearing scissor-wielding ladies, and ghosts made out of people who have committed suicide. GhostWire Tokyo wears its inspiration for its monster designs right there on its sleeves, drawing deep from the absolute ocean of Japanese mythology, folklore, and urban legends. Even the yokai that you don't fight are interesting in their own way, each of them having their own background and lore that a player can look up using the in-game codex, or else on Wikipedia for a more complete history. I remember when this game was being advertised and its writers and developers were doing interviews. They talked a lot about the Slendermen enemies, and how they liked the idea that in the old days, people's beliefs and superstitions helped give these spirits their forms, and that even now, in the modern age, even if most people are no longer overly spiritual, their beliefs are still shaping these beings. how an urban legend is still a legend, and how it could give rise to a new yokai based on the legend it tells. And I think this concept is illustrated wonderfully in a single specific side mission, where, venturing into a building that was recently rebuilt, we spot a yokai concealing a doorway leading down into the basement of the old building, supposedly the lair of a person called the Red Lady. Inside the basement, we find a dark and dingy nightmare realm, littered with the souls of people who previously wandered down here and died because of the Red Lady and are now trapped here with no way out. When we confront the Red Lady, she's vicious and strong. Her attacks are fast and she can close the distance between us very quickly, making retreat only a momentary reprieve. Luckily, she's still vulnerable to our attacks, and a few good shots are enough to put her down. Despite this being a side mission that the player can do at any time, I can't help but feel that this side mission expertly details how a collective belief can form a new legend, and in turn, a new monster. The setup for the story itself reminds me a lot of Bloody Mary, and I could easily see how, as the bodies piled up and the belief in the Red Lady became stronger and stronger, feeding this monster and making her stronger and faster and more deadly until we came upon her and put an end to her. So, as it turns out, giants made of swirling spiritual energy gathering within the city of Tokyo is a bad thing. Who would have guessed? The problem is that the area they've gathered in is still covered in fog, so naturally we go back to Torii Gate busting, which admittedly I'm getting a little tired of by now. Interestingly enough though, after we bust a few gates, we're directed to a specific one, and while we work to cleanse it, we catch the attention of one of the giants, who turns to face us. That turns out to be a very bad thing, as being around this giant is like being in a hurricane, as wind and rain pelt us from basically all directions. The giant also travels with an entourage of powerful monsters, which attack us in waves until we manage to drive them off and activate the Torii Gate. KK decides that this isn't working and that sealing the Torii Gates will take too long. Not only that, but it'll invite more attention from the giants, which could easily destroy us with very little effort based on the amount of power that they have. Instead, he directs us to an old parking garage which is swarming with enemies. Stealthing our way through it, we make our way to the garage's basement, and there we find a motorbike that KK's old friend Rinko had been building to be resistant to the fog's soul-stealing effects. Okay, time out. What? All game long, this fog has supposedly been a huge threat to us, and now you're telling me there was a bike that would have made me immune to it? Not only that, but how does this immunity work? Is this like a magic bike or cursed? Do I have to stay on the bike for the immunity effect to work? For that matter, how did Rinko know about the fog before it showed up? Is soul-stealing fog just a spell in some random grimoire that they have access to? I have so many questions, but the game doesn't want to answer any of them. As it turns out, the bike isn't complete and is missing a few normal parts as well as something called underworld oil. Which, can I just say, of all the MacGuffins the writers could have come up with, underworld oil just sounds so dumb. You're telling me with a straight face that petrol is still a thing in the afterlife? Now yes, I suppose it is made up of the liquefied bodies of long-dead dinosaurs, and we don't have time for this! Climbing to the top of the nearby tower, we survey the surrounding area with a viewfinder and spot a fancy car that might have the parts we need, and a Torii Gate that is full to bursting with corruption. I decide to head to the car first, which turns out to be a dud as none of the parts are compatible. But as we lament the waste of time, the lights begin to flicker and go out one by one. I, the player, know what's about to happen, but the characters don't, as they suddenly find themselves frozen in place with a burst of cold before being attacked by the demon parade and sucked into another portal realm. Once again, we find ourselves separated from KK and his powers, which kind of makes me wonder if he knows of a way to make it so that this doesn't keep happening. Nearby, we spot KK on a small island, surrounded by enemies who want to make him their next spiritual meal. Luckily for us, we still have our sacred bow, and there just happens to be a convenient, bottomless quiver of arrows nearby. So we snipe the outsiders from afar, doing our best to keep them away from KK before jumping down and rejoining with him once they're all dead. But like seriously, KK, isn't there something we can do so we don't keep getting separated like this? Once back in the real world, we head for the Torii Gate we'd spotted and find that it's basically at full capacity and acting as a portal to the underworld. Which, is that what these gates actually do? Like, I thought they just absorbed corruption and negative energy. You're telling me that if they absorb enough, I can actually go to the afterlife? As it turns out, things aren't so good in this little corner of the afterlife, as corruption and monsters have infested the small island we find ourselves on. The game probably wants me to sneak around and use my cunning and skills to defeat the monsters without being seen, but I stealth one guy and then just start blasting the rest of them until I clear the way and we head for the small shrine in the middle of the island. Stepping into the shrine, we experience a reality shift and find ourselves doing battle with some ice lady monster thing. She's definitely tough and her ice slows down my movements, and of course she can pull KK out of me and make me lose my powers for a time. Seriously, KK, isn't there like a collar or a leash I can put on you and just use it to pull you back into me or something? Anyways, at the end, I have to use an ability I've hardly used up until now to win: blocking. This allows me to weather her powerful attacks, but also keep her close enough that I can blast away at her until she finally dies with one final fireball to the face. And with that, I am free to collect the underworld oil. As we go to leave, the underworld corruption starts to reappear and a small army of powerful monsters appears in front of us to try and keep us from leaving. But KK shouts at us to run, and for once, I agree with him. So we make a mad dash for the portal and manage to escape with our prize, leaving the monsters behind. Something I do want to call out are some of the visuals and moments of spectacle during some of the game's altered world moments. I've always been a fan of surrealist or abstract environments, so I was absolutely blown away by some of the moments in this game. Up until now, the Ashtray Maze by Remedy's Control has been one of my favorite moments in gaming involving an altered world environment, but some of the moments in GhostWire Tokyo can be just as beautiful and intricate, though sadly not nearly as long. I'm going to borrow Control's term for these events, AWEs, and use that from now on, as constantly saying altered world event would get a bit tedious and repetitive from this point on. We're first introduced to the idea of an AWE after leaving KK's apartment for the first time. When we duck into another apartment, we learn it's saturated with corruption, which is twisting the apartment's insides and changing its layouts and dimensions. Not only that, but the contents of the room can move too, rearranging itself however it pleases. In another apartment, we're shown an even more extreme version of this, with rooms that suddenly seem to teleport or transport the player to other locations, though still obeying the rules of the room they were previously in. Occasionally, while walking around the world, the player will also come across a random AWE, in which the symbols and patterns painted on the streets begin to ripple and wave as if in water, before detaching from the streets and floating in the air for a short period of time. But the game definitely saves its best AWEs for its story moments, dropping some amazingly haunting and otherworldly visuals when it knows the player will be looking where it wants them to. As I travel the altered landscapes, I can't help but wonder how they did it. To me, events such as these are things that video games are uniquely able to express and help a person experience. Yes, a good book might be able to vividly describe such events, and a movie might be able to visually show you it, but only in a game can a character walk through the event and experience it, and react to its actions. I love moments like these in gaming, moments where the idea of reality becomes malleable and flexible, and what is normal is substituted for the abnormal, the strange, and the weird. In a way, it feels like looking at the margins of reality, where the cleanly printed words end and instead the blank space is filled with scribbles and notes and random ideas. It's one of the reasons why Control by Remedy is one of my favorite games of all time. And yes, I am thinking about trying to make a video about it in the future. In the end, I don't really have much to say from a critical standing about these moments in the game, unless you want to hear me ramble on poetically about them, or listen to me try and piece together how they make them work from a mechanical standpoint. I just love moments like this, where reality falls away and the player finds themselves in a truly other kind of world, and I wish more games would do stuff like this. Now, with everything we need in hand, we head back to the parking garage and get to work on the bike before heading out. As we do so, the game gives us the by now obligatory point of no return message and tells us that after this point, several side missions and events will become closed to us, though we will be given a chance to stock up on supplies before the final ending. Hopping on the bike, we blaze our way through the city, heading for the swirling vortex of energy and fog. Switching on the anti-fog systems, we find the bike projects a kind of containment field that blocks the fog from getting to us, allowing us to slip into it without disappearing and losing our physical form. Our trespass, however, has not gone unnoticed, and soon enough, Hanya's final remaining minion, his wife, finds us and begins to attack us. Luckily for us, we make it through the barrier of the fog before our bike is destroyed, and in the crash, we manage to land a good shot against our attacker's chest, knocking them back for a time and allowing us to continue on foot. The area inside the barrier looks fairly normal and intact. In fact, it's actually more peaceful than outside the barrier because there don't seem to be any random enemies wandering around to attack us. As we make our way through the shrine, we find a familiar face, Rinko, the lady whose bike we used to get here. She reveals that this is where she died when the fog rolled in, and now it's almost time for her to go, before wishing KK and Akito luck as she dissolves and passes on. Moving on, we go to exit the shrine only to encounter Hanya's minion before getting sucked into another Oni boss battle. This battle is with a giant spider, and she has two weak points, one on her stomach and one in her mouth, but she moves around a lot, so it can be pretty tricky to get a lead on her. In truth, I ended up getting pretty lucky with this battle. When I did enough damage to her stomach, I was not only able to rip out her core, I was also able to deal enough damage to her face when she fell forward that I was able to rip out that core in rapid succession and end the battle rather quickly. Stepping over her body, we head for what looks to be a shopping mall with a replica Eiffel Tower on top of it, and it's here that Akito starts to have some auditory hallucinations, hearing what he thinks are Mari's inner thoughts, berating him for not coming sooner and not being there for her when she needed him. When we reach the top of the tower, we find Mari and Hanya together, with Hanya monologuing about how, in his new world, everything will be a paradise and how no one will ever know the pain of loss again. When we try to get to Mari, a barrier pops up, keeping us from getting any closer. Hanya then turns to us and asks us why we continue to resist, as succeeding would mean Mari's soul returns to her body, which had been injured in the fire. He points out that such an existence must be very painful for her, so why would we wish to return her to that? Those words get to Akito, and he starts to question himself. So much so that when the wall of the tower is broken by one of the giant spiritual guardians, and Hanya takes Mari and is swallowed by the giant, Akito does not go after them. In a rage, KK half talks, half beats some sense into Akito, before pointing out that they can still go after Hanya and Mari and ask what Mari wants before they do anything. But before we can follow Hanya and Mari, KK's body crawls into the room and forces us to fight it one last time. This battle is a bit trickier than the last one because you have to match the color of the Oni's aura with the color of that corresponding element in order to deal damage to it. During this fight, we get to hear some of KK's past inner thoughts, and it's pretty clear that the man resented a lot of how his life has turned out, bemoaning how no one fights harder than he does to keep everyone safe, but that all he gets for it are cold shoulders and made out to be some kind of a glorified errand boy for others. It's an interesting insight to our little tag-along that we haven't gotten up until this point. But there's no time to lose as the large ghost giant starts to move away from the tower. We jump and use the same GhostWire we've been using to rip out enemies' cores to Spider-Man swing our way to and into the giant. Once inside the giant, we find ourselves in some kind of limbo realm, not quite living, but not quite dead either. We eventually come to a door that leads us to a procession of Akito and Mari's memories, starting from when they were children and ending just before the fire that injured Mari. And I gotta be honest, I don't like this sequence at all. Like, I get narratively why it's here, to show that while the two siblings used to be close, they started to drift apart as they got older, and then even more so after their parents died. The thing is, these flashbacks paint Akito as the bad guy for wanting to spend time with his friends and not his sister when they were younger, which I feel is more of a side effect of him growing up and not an indication of some kind of moral failure on his part. Not only that, but as they grow older, anytime something bad happens, Akito is painted as uncaring or dismissive or cold, to how Mari feels about it. And while there are a few kind and wholesome memories, none of them seem to do a good job of showing what Akito is feeling as things play out. Mari wasn't the only one who lost her parents. Akito lost his too. Not only that, but he suddenly found himself having to take care of his younger sister, which is probably not something he ever expected to do. Now, yes, it's clear in the flashbacks that Mari is suffering from some pretty severe depression, but at the same time, no attention is paid to Akito, which, as a male who has suffered from severe depression and anxiety in my real life, bothers me, the player, quite a lot. Mari is not the only one who suffered during this period. She's just the only one whose suffering the game is giving a voice to. Personally, I'd have found this entire sequence way more interesting if at first we heard things from Mari's perspective, and then we heard Akito's take on those same events. For example, at one point during a memory of Akito and Mari moving into a new and slightly rundown apartment, Mari comments internally, "How many fresh starts are we going to have to make before we hit rock bottom?" And I really wanted to hear Akito respond with something like, "I'm trying my best, but no matter what I do, it's never enough." Something, anything. But no, we get nothing from Akito's side. At the end of the sequence, Akito finds himself standing before a large stone door. KK asks if he's ready, and Akito says yes before the two of them push open the door and step through it. Side missions in GhostWire Tokyo are a bit of a mixed bag. Some of them are quick little missions, helping a girl to retrieve her umbrella that turned into a yokai when it started to rain, finding a room hidden in a hotel that people disappear into, or helping a spirit trapped in a public restroom by finding his much-needed toilet paper. These missions are quick and easy. Other missions are a bit more memorable. A woman's boyfriend killed himself after being assigned to work as a technician for a building that has a reputation of driving people to suicide. This mission will have you delving into the building itself to free the cursed and trapped souls, while also confronting the culprit in the form of a greedy landlord who thinks that just because people live in his building and owe him rent, that he owns them. In another mission, a man laments that his best friend went to find the Lady in Red in the old basement of a recently rebuilt building. When we go into the basement, we find ourselves in a dank and dungeonous looping corridor, surrounded by the ghosts of those who have come before us, all of them wailing how there is no escape and how the Lady in Red rules this place. When she actually appears, the Red Lady is genuinely scary, a variant of the Scissor Lady demon who is faster, stronger, colored red, and in a first for the game, is capable of pulling KK out of our body for a time if she gets too close. Another mission sees us venturing back to the hospital to speak with the spirit of a little girl who sees monsters when she closes her eyes. This will eventually lead us to an OR that is always kept locked and has a reputation of being haunted after several unexpected complications happened during various surgeries that were being performed there. Turns out the OR is actually haunted, and it's up to us to cleanse it. But these aren't the only side missions GhostWire Tokyo has to offer. Spirit Collection is a games-long running side quest that sees the player using their Katashiro to hoover and Roomba up wayward and lost souls to be transported out of Tokyo via phone booths. Story-wise, we're told that the less souls our enemies have access to, the easier it will be to beat them, but honestly, it doesn't matter plot-wise and instead only affects you and your experience. There are even a few missions you can get from Ed, one of KK's allies, and the one behind all the phone booth tech, though we're never told what the outcome of these side quests mean. Additionally, the game introduces spirit photography missions about halfway through. The player is given a photograph and tasked with finding and cleansing the location where the photograph was taken. I'll be honest, I didn't do any of these ones as I'm not very good with these kinds of puzzles. As I mentioned before, side questing in GhostWire Tokyo is a bit of a hodgepodge of an idea. Some are serious, some are silly, most are pretty quick, and all of them serve the character's progression arc and not the actual main story. Also, one small complaint I have, most side quests see you talking to a ghost, start them, and then going to a new location. But when you're done, there's oftentimes no marker to lead you back to the ghost who gave you the mission in the first place, despite almost all of them having dialogue for when you complete their quests and they move on. On the other side of the door, Akito finds himself looking at a small island, above which all the gathered souls that Hanya has collected through his plan float in a massive glowing swarm. On the island, Hanya is talking about his plan and how it's almost complete, how Mari will serve as the new Eve in the new world, and how despite all of our meddlings, we're too late. When we go to try and stop him, we're ambushed by a dozen or so monsters, while Hanya begins to channel power through himself and then into Mari. Akito and KK put up a valiant effort, but they're clearly outmatched and outgunned, as Hanya continues to channel his power into Mari until a giant sinkhole appears behind him. A portal to the underworld, he declares. That's when he tries to stop time, which at first seems to have worked. That is until Hanya notices a small flower that is starting to bloom at his feet. As he turns and looks, dozens if not hundreds of flowers are starting to bloom, and looking up in the sky, we see Mari floating and glowing, seemingly healed of her injuries. Hanya declares that his plan cannot be stopped now and lashes out at Mari, only for his spell to ricochet off of her and back at him, knocking him into the hole and seemingly to his death. Rushing forward, Akito catches Mari as she falls, and the two of them are finally able to speak to one another. Akito apologizes for being emotionally distant, and Mari forgives him while also explaining that the reason she got hurt was that during the fire she went back to get their parents' wedding rings, and it ended up getting trapped in her room because of it. Weakened from her injuries and everything that has happened, Mari dies, and Akito grieves for a moment before being interrupted by Hanya, who reappears with the souls of his wife and daughter clinging to his back as he climbs out of the pit, and laughs that for all our interference, we still failed. How he could have brought about an era of peace and unification for all, but now that he has what he wants, he sees no reason to do that anymore, and that he and his family shall be joined together forever, before seeming to absorb the souls of his wife and daughter into himself, before pulling us into a pocket world for one final confrontation. This battle was tough, and it took me a few minutes to figure out what I was supposed to be doing. Hanya takes the form of some kind of corrupted and mutant fish that swims around the battlefield and can even slip beneath the waters that we're standing on. To hurt him, we have to target the masks that are sticking out of his body and blast them until they break and expose the core behind them. Ripping the core out removes the soul from Hanya's body. Repeating this process 3 times sees him being defeated, which is kinda anticlimactic if I'm honest, but I suppose it works. As Hanya fades away into nothingness, Akito finds himself and Mari alone in a misty forest. In front of them, dressed in white robes and wearing masks, are what appear to be a man and a woman, and Akito correctly guesses that it's the souls of his mother and father come to guide Mari into her afterlife. He does apologize to them and promises that he will do better, and the next time they all meet, he'll have led a full and happy life. In response, his parents say nothing and silently pick Mari's body up before walking away. As Akito turns and walks away, KK pipes up and asks Akito to do him a favor. That woman and boy in the photograph we saw, well, that's KK's wife and son, whom he has a somewhat strained relationship with. Now, he asks us to go to them, if they're still alive, and explain everything that happened. That way, they'll at least know that it wasn't that he didn't love them, but that he was trying to keep them safe as the reason for his prolonged absence in their lives. KK also admits that he's getting pretty tired, and as we take another step, the dark voids on our body that represents KK's possession fade away, meaning KK has passed on to his own afterlife. And with that, we're shown a final shot of the game, Akito walking through a trail of torii gates that presumably lead back to the living before a fade to black. In video games, the soundtrack is always an important part of the game, as it's one of the main auditory cues to help the player understand what is going on and how they should feel about it. In a game that is supposed to be horror-themed, the soundtrack is incredibly important, as it not only helps to set the mood and atmosphere for the scene the player is in, but also helps to add that additional layer of terror or tension. And it's here that I think GhostWire Tokyo does a really good job for the most part. For games like this, the soundtrack is more than just the music playing as you fight monsters. It's the soundscape of the monsters themselves and the environments you find yourself fighting in. And here too is an area that I feel GhostWire Tokyo put a great deal of effort and time into, making sure that the monsters, even if you cannot see them, could be heard all around you, adding to the sense of tension as you round that blind corner and risk coming face to face with them. Each monster sounds slightly different, making different sounds that can help you identify them if you know what to listen for. For example, most Slenderman and Paper Doll enemies will make a kind of laughing warble or else a low grumbling growl as they wander around, whereas the flying ghost enemies will have an almost musical tone to them. The sound of the monsters mixes with the sound of the constant rain and the sound of your footsteps, creating a soundscape that can be very unnerving and tense, especially if you don't know exactly where the monsters are, like in the segments where you don't have KK's power. The actual music in the game is appropriately haunting and creepy. According to my research, there are a total of 31 individual tracks that total, if played back to back, a little over 3 hours worth of music. In an interview with Shack News, director Kenji Kimura and composer Masatoshi Yanagi both talked about their approach to making the soundtrack for the game. Yanagi stated that, in the beginning, I walked around Tokyo in different areas like the Yansin region to get a feel of the different vibes of the city. Later, when asked how they balanced the environmental sounds with the soundtracks, Yanagi said the sense of immersion, of feeling like you were in the city, was very important for the game. So we mainly placed the environment sounds first and then used music to help supplement the atmosphere, especially where more tension is needed. And so, rather than using music with strong melodies for filling in the gaps, I tended to use music and sound that would help with the atmosphere. Later, Kimura would add, when asked about segments that take place in warped reality, it was a challenge to balance out the length of those intense moments as it required a lot of trial and error. We'd create the visuals first to create and check the emotional curve, and then determine the amount of walking that is needed to get to the location that would be considered this area's peak. Working with Yanagi-san was easy because he would make the music and it wouldn't require a lot of retakes. His use of the Japanese traditional instruments and the way he'd combine them with the use of synthesizers is amazing. He's able to control the tension in such a beautiful way. Simply put, GhostWire Tokyo's soundtrack is very well crafted and expertly executed, and goes a long way to helping craft the world that the player finds themselves in. If you're a fan of Asian-inspired music or horror music in general, I would strongly recommend giving this soundtrack a listen. On April 12, 2023, GhostWire Tokyo's timed exclusivity with PlayStation expired, and the game was brought over to Xbox consoles. In addition to this, the game's only DLC was released. Titled The Spider's Thread, this DLC would introduce new enemies to the main game, as well as new unlockable skills, several side missions, story cinematics, and a new area within Tokyo to explore. The side missions of the DLC are a trio of missions that follow the adventures of a high school supernatural club, as they find themselves slowly ensnared by actual supernatural phenomena. Sadly, the game doesn't really mark these side missions as special or as part of the DLC, so in my first playthrough, I completely missed them. I ended up loading up an old save to go back and play them, and let me tell you, what I found was a series of missions that were oddly enough more scary than anything I'd encountered in the main game. Mission 1 sees us sneaking into the school and locating the Supernatural Club's club room. Once there, we're able to search the place and figure out that the kids in the club found a series of symbols throughout the school that they thought would grant them wishes when activated, but instead ended up releasing an evil entity into the school. With that in mind, we have to retrace the kids' footsteps and locate the 4 symbols hidden around the school in various classrooms. What makes that so scary, you might be asking? And my answer is, how would you like it if while you were creeping around a school at night, a medical testing dummy was following you around and would run at you anytime you turn your back on it? Let me be honest with you, there are some horror tropes that really get to me, and something that moves when I turn my back to it is one of those tropes. So as lame as it may sound, I spent the entire mission with my heart in my throat, doing my best not to freak out anytime this damn dummy would appear out of the corner of my eye. Luckily, after finding all 4 symbols, we're directed to the roof where we do battle with a few waves of enemies summoned by Hanako-sama, while in between each wave cleansing 4 cursed mirrors. Once all 4 are cleansed, Hanako-sama's rift is closed, though sadly, she's not completely defeated. Now that the school is cleansed of Hanako-sama's influence, one of the members of the Supernatural Club has been able to manifest as a ghost. He explains that Hanako-sama possessed another member of the club and that we still need to rescue her. Returning to the club room, we do some research and discover that there have been a series of strange disappearances in the school involving rooms with mirrors. So we make our way to the sites of the last two disappearances, the third-floor bathroom and the principal's office. And sure enough, in both rooms, we find a mirror glowing with otherworldly energy. When we look into it, we get sucked into the mirror and wind up in a kind of nightmare mirror realm. This is the world Hanako-sama lives in. And even looking at her is enough to cause us physical damage. So it's mandatory stealth from this point forward, as we creep our way through this nightmare reflection of the school, all while avoiding Hanako-sama and looking at her while we listen to her cry. And again, this place is pretty fucking creepy, and makes the hair on the back of my neck tingle and stand up, as I slowly work my way through the level and towards our escape. Luckily for us, the final mission is a good old-fashioned ass-whoopin', and sees us following a trail of slime into the main gym of the school before doing battle with a giant slime monster as well as several smaller hordes of enemies, while Hanako-sama watches us. Once her minions are dead, we turn our attention to her, and after a few hand signs, we banish her negative energy and force her to pass on from this world to the next. This completes the DLC side missions and allows us to finally leave the school after having a final conversation with the ghosts of the Supernatural Club, who thank us for our help. In the end, I enjoyed these trio of missions, even if the first two were creepy as all hell to me and made my skin crawl several times. They definitely felt different from the other missions in the game and have a slightly more sinister undertone, as the game makes it clear that all this stuff was happening before the Fog and KK showed up. Additionally, the DLC also adds a new mode to the game that the player can access from the main menu. Doing so will drop them into a self-contained story involving KK, Akido, and having to fight their way through a gauntlet of enemies to reach a spider demon that Hanya has angered and is threatening to break into the real world. The gameplay itself is about what you'd expect. Each floor the player finds themselves in is a gauntlet of enemies, with sometimes additional challenges to complete for an additional reward. In between each level, the player is given a chance to return to a kind of shopping level run by the boss of the Nekomata yokai, and buy supplies, healing items, and other items that can help them in their journey. I'll admit, this mode is a bit of a mixed bag for me. I enjoy the combat of GhostWire Tokyo for the most part, so more of it isn't a bad thing to me. But the lack of plot is kind of a bummer. Like, I get why this uber-powerful spider demon breaking into the human world would be a bad thing. Spider anything breaking into the human world is not good in my book. But at the same time, who exactly is this demon? What did Hanya do to anger her? What is his plan with her? And for that matter, who are these three guardian dudes and why can't they do anything to stop her? I will also admit, to go from having all of my powers and abilities in the main game suddenly back to level 1 in this DLC, that was a bit of a whiplash for me. So much so that I actually forgot that the ability to charge up my attacks was an upgrade that I had to buy. It's become such second nature to me that no longer having access to it was a major blow to my playstyle. That being said, after a while I started to find myself in a bit of a groove, and I actually started to have fun again as I went from level to level and tried out the various challenges. Some of them are pretty basic, beat a certain number of enemies or race from one end of the level to the other. Some of them are a bit more complex, asking the player to save an NPC from attacking outsiders or else guide them through a level. A few asked me to get through a level unseen by enemies, and a few other levels asked me to locate a hidden object in order to open the way forward. Sadly, my skills were not quite good enough to make it to the 30th floor and the boss located there. And for the first few runs, I usually found myself being booted back to the beginning around the 14th or 15th floor. After around the third time this happened, I did get a little curious and did some YouTubing, only to find out that the boss at the end of the DLC is just a reuse of the spider boss from the main game, which, if I'm honest, kinda killed my interest in making it to the final level. I had been hoping that since this was a DLC, they would have made a new boss for us to fight, since the main game had so few bosses. Sadly, this was not the case, so that's sorta where my playthrough of the DLC ended. Overall, I would give this DLC a B ranking. It's fun if you like GhostWire's combat, and it does offer up new ideas to make it enjoyable and make you want to press your luck. But the lack of new enemies or a new boss at the end are kinda disappointing, and I also have no idea where this adventure is supposed to tie in with the larger main game's narrative. Now, after having played and beaten GhostWire Tokyo, I would consider this game a bit of an advertising bait and switch, with the trailers selling it as a horror/action game, when in reality it is more of an action/horror game. That being said, the game is fun and has some interesting ideas when it comes to combat and monster design. It just seems that in their attempt to interest as many people as possible, they kinda lost the original thread they were working on and instead focused on other things. Reviewers at the time of the game's release seemed to agree with this, as many of them gave the game generally favorable reviews, but also complained about the less than scary horror elements and the lack of details with various enemies. Some reviewers also felt the combat, though flashy and attention-grabbing, lacked depth and eventually would become overly repetitive, which I would agree with as well. At the time of writing this, Metacritic scores give the PC and PS5 version of the game a 78 and 75 respectively, while the Xbox version is currently sitting at an 88. And it also won the Game Award for Excellence at the 2022 Japanese Game Awards. At some point, a sequel to GhostWire Tokyo was mentioned in one of Bethesda's internal roadmaps and was scheduled for release around the 2024 fiscal year, but with Tango Gameworks being shut down by Microsoft in May of 2024, any future games are uncertain as of right now. We can confirm that Bethesda does still own the rights to the game and its setting, but it has not made any public statements about a sequel or continuing the game, so as of right now, the game currently sits in limbo. Though the game is not exactly as originally promised, I enjoyed my time with it. The game itself, including the DLC, took me around 13 hours, 29 minutes, 11 seconds to complete, and I'll admit I didn't even come close to finding all the collectibles or finishing all of the side missions, so it's possible I could have easily put a dozen more hours into it. In the end, if what you saw interests you, I'd say GhostWire Tokyo is worth picking up when it goes on sale. Its unique setting and lore does make for an interesting game. Just don't expect it to be too scary. I want to thank those of you who stuck around and watched the entire video. It really means a lot to me. Thank you. I think this is going to be my last gaming video for the year of 2025, as several games have come out that I want to play just for fun. Though I will probably stream myself playing them, so if you want, you can always join me over on Twitch, a link to which can be found on my YouTuber profile and in the notes of this video. That being said, I do have an idea for a kind of year-in wrap-up video that I want to make, outlining how my channel has grown this year, and what I have planned in the coming year, and some of the games you can expect to see me talk about, as well as just some general feedback and chatting with you, the viewers. So keep an eye out for that, though I have no ETA on it at the moment. Until then, feel free to check out some of my other videos, and if you enjoyed what you saw, please like and subscribe to the channel, or feel free to leave a comment. Goodbye!